Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast with Ron and Kristen, where leadership meets entertainment. This podcast features stories with names and certain aspects that have been changed to keep submissions private. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast. I'm your co-host, Kristen Sock, and I'm sitting here with co-host Ron Ward. Ron, you ready to talk about something positive today?
I am. My gosh, I didn't realize we were so negative, but we've been hitting people kind of hard. So I'm glad that was Kristen's personality the first few episodes, and now we're going to reflect mine. So
yeah, exactly. It's like, well, it's the dirty side of leadership. We definitely went
true.
Where others don't generally go, but it's good to episode 7. Let's bring some positivity to the forefront here. So today's episode is, Are You a Great Leader? It's an important topic because despite the negatives that everyone experiences in the workplace, almost everyone has been influenced by a leader in a positive way. We are going to discuss what leadership qualities great leaders possess and how to either enhance your existing leadership qualities or blow it up and rebuild based on proven techniques. Now, I want to ask you a question, Ron, because I wanted to not to go negative already, but I wanted to really understand different leadership styles on a wide spectrum. So let's talk about a few famous dictators. We have Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini, Tojo of Japan. When you go and you research their leadership qualities, on the surface level, they are what seem to be positive. What went wrong?
Yeah. Well, number one, I'm not sure anyone is equipped to handle full power, without getting polluted. And I think that's probably what happens. Things start off small and then you begin to just get so arrogant and everyone is saying what you want to hear. So I think maybe I'm definitely not saying any of the leaders that you mentioned, they had some evil qualities for sure, but I do think they got worse as time went on. But it is worth mentioning that because they were such visionaries, and again, I want it on the record, it was deplorable, but they were such visionaries, they did inspire people. And some of the things that I will never be able to understand. I know that fear dictated some behaviors, but how could Hitler literally persuade a nation to hate at the level that Nazi Germany hated and justify the conduct and place people in charge? You and I talked about leadership one day, and I said that a lot of narcissists will have yes people, and they will even pit people against each other. Hitler was notorious for that. He would switch his alliance, and then the others would have to either do more heinous crimes or they would have to do other things to try to get in his favor. But believe it or not, Kristen, and no one talks about this because no one wants to, frankly.
Right.
But Nazi Germany, the way they did marketing, again, horrible, but the way they marketed, they had uniforms for the Reich, the different sections of the Reich. They would edit videos meticulously to make sure that they look powerful and majestic and all of these things. And they started convincing people. They were the first to use media, and they began to convince people we really are the superior race. And people bought in and believed it. Now, when America came to the Olympics and Jesse Owens, kicked butt running, it was really hard for the Germans to digest at that point. But again, when you talk about Stalin and you talk about Mussolini and, you watch Mussolini's speeches, he was so confident. There's something about that being a visionary and understanding marketing that they were able to persuade all these people. And I think for us to be careful with where we tread, we need to study these people. And we also need to understand that all of these communist dictators killed millions of people. And some of them was even family members, brother-in-laws, they would kill. So I that's a side note, but I think we got to be very careful when we start idolizing socialism / communism and fascism.
Absolutely. It's very important. And when you were speaking about the marketing aspect of it, I thought of present day North Korea, because if you literally go on YouTube and you watch North Korea and then there are soldiers marching, talk about meticulous. It is like watching really a beautiful art form in front of you. But I just imagine, I like to joke around, imagine one person falls out of line, that they're going to hang them in the public square.
Yeah.
That's unfortunately what this type of leader does. But it is all about the show and the appearance and the persuasion and that power. And it is very important that we do study what these leaders have done in the past, and then identify that in current and present day and in the future.
Media changed the world. You could go back to 1960 when Kennedy and Nixon debated. And there are people to this day who say that Nixon won the debate on the radio, but Kennedy allowed them to apply makeup. Nixon had the sweat on his brow. He looked pale. He'd been sick. He'd been in the hospital, if I remember correctly. So the first televised debate, people believe, handed Kennedy a win. And when you mention North Korea, again, they're mimicking what we saw in Nazi Germany. Right. It's the same type thing. But people are voyeurs. You and I have talked about this. You're a major social media influencer. And Kristen, you can put the best quote in the world, but if you don't have your picture or a good picture with it, you're not going to get as many likes. It's just the way we are. So media changed the world, and we are bought in hook, line, and sinker.
We are visual beings, that is for sure.
Are.
Well, speaking of social media, so I polled my Instagram followers on what they feel is the most important leadership quality. And the top 5 results were honesty, a good listener, a strong communicator, they have integrity, and this one threw me a bit, godliness. And also I have to mention one infant said, someone with a big dong. So, yeah, that's an infant response. Did you almost spit your coffee out?
Oh my God, I almost.
Well, it could have been the fact that I went from godliness to someone with a big dong.
Yeah,
that was not intentional, but that literally is how I wrote it out here. But I think, let's just say this person, I call him an infant. I love saying that. But let's just say he's referring to BDE. I want to ask you, do you know what BDE is? You don't have to fully go there if you do.
Kristen, I do, because you told me.
Okay. All right. For those who don't know, I'm not Ron. Ron's probably sweating over there.
I am, because could you have waited? You went godliness, and somehow you've gotten over to BDE.
I'm gonna get back there, though. there. So, okay, BDE. Let's just say big dong energy. Now, that is something that really just came by storm on Twitter in 2018. And really what it's referring to is a quiet confidence and someone that has ease with themselves. Not cockiness, not a power trip, actually completely the opposite. Ron's pointing to himself right now for those who are
totally joking.
I like to say, I've referred to myself as having BDE before. I'm like, I just, not literally technically, but the quiet confidence. A lot of people are attracted to that. They don't really want that overtly cocky person around them. Okay, let's pivot back though. Let me redeem myself here. So I mentioned earlier godliness was number 5. And again, I was quite shocked by this. And so I really wanted to pick that apart and understand how that can appropriately play out in the workplace, because I've mentioned on prior episodes that religion was just completely, and should be, off the table for leaders in the workplace. There's going to be instances where maybe there's a small family-owned business and everyone's relatively on the same page, maybe with faith, but you still have to be very, very careful. So as I put that out there, I want to say I picked it apart because I really wanted to understand how this can actually play out in the workplace. And so what I found was, with the faith references, I found that God is a number of things, but in the Bible, the primary character traits that God has is God is love. So I'm going to break these down here. Okay, so God is love. So I'm like, okay, let's how do you show love in the workplace and have that be appropriate, right? But how do you show love as a leader? That's by knowing and caring about the personal lives of your team members in an authentic and appropriate way. So really serving your team and being a servant leader is not a weakness. It is a strength. So that is one aspect of that. Knowledge also. So God is knowledge. Okay. So then again, breaking it down to the workplace, it's not about how much knowledge you have as an individual leader. It's your ability to focus on your team, to understand your team's growth level, their overall competence, and knowing your team members' dreams. That's the knowledge that a leader must possess to be a good leader. Ron, I want to pause. What are your thoughts on that as far as knowledge?
I absolutely love this. And, I realized you would think, when you talk about macho people, when I was a deputy sheriff, you would think some of those guys may have not even believed in God. But it's interesting, almost every one of them did, because you see good and evil up close. It's a different viewpoint than the normal person has. And I dealt with people that I promise I saw evil looking back at me. And I know that's not politically correct, but it's very true. So I'm really not surprised that godliness, because, we live in a culture where people hold grudges and, we're polarized as a society. They're trying to break us up into racial groups and all these things. And I think there is a longing, there is that God-shaped void that people are crying out, and they do want this type of leader. They've had the narcissists that we've talked about. They've had horrible bosses, and they want these characteristics. And they know down deep, if they meet someone or they have someone leading them, they may not agree with everything, but they do know that they're going to be headed in the right direction for sure.
All right, let's talk about mercy. God is merciful. We've all been recipients of mercy at some time in our lives. When leaders show mercy, they are demonstrating that people's lives are valuable. Now, we've probably all had a leader who was unable to show mercy, even in a very benign situation. And those leaders need to examine their hearts. We have the power as leaders to influence others' lives. Leaders have the power to show mercy. Leaders have a responsibility to reflect on the mercy they have been shown. And leaders are given the power, whether they're deserving or not. We've all had the not deserving leaders, but they have the power nonetheless, and the opportunity to demonstrate that all persons, regardless of race, abilities, or anything that they've done in their past, that they have value. Wow, that one's pretty powerful.
It is. Yeah, again, you just cannot go wrong with those characteristics,
right?
And showing mercy. And, we always said, Kristen, we may have sounded tough, and we said, I think your statement is coach up or coach out, something like that. But when we say that, we're looking at what's beneficial to the overall team. And that's where it gets dicey for some people, because we see what's in front of us. But sometimes we have to make decisions that is best for the team.
Exactly.
But mercy and forgiveness and giving second chances, those are all characteristics of a great leader. Doesn't make them weak, makes them very powerful.
Right. I agree. And I was shown mercy when I left the vault door open overnight once. I will say, people don't think there's not just like money just hanging out everywhere, right? Like vaults have like 3 different doors you have to go through. They're all combination, lock, yada, yada. But I did leave the largest door wide open, and had never done that. I mean, I was in banking a long time at that specific location. I had been the manager for 6 years and never made a mistake like that. And I was shown mercy. What?
Kristen bought a Maserati a week after that.
Yeah,
I'm not saying anything happened.
Now, there is a difference when the vault door is left open and then you have a discrepancy. Now, that's that. I would not have been shown mercy in that situation. But we're talking a door. Nothing happened, thankfully, but still not a good look. But I was shown mercy because they were able to look at the big picture. And really, I think it's important. You look at somebody and they say they've made a large mistake, but you look at the impact and you say, really, what is their track record? If the track record, if this is just completely an anomaly, you need to take that into account. I don't believe in just terminating somebody if they've made one relatively low impact mistake. But some people, they rule with an iron fist, and there just isn't any gray, which to me, I think that they're small-minded when there isn't a gray area. But what are your thoughts on that, Ron?
No, totally agree. I tell everyone in my leadership training, I always say isolated incident versus pattern.
Yes.
That's what you got to determine.
Yes.
It was an isolated incident.
Exactly. I love that. The last one here is God is just. A just leader is fair and honest to protect those they love. Leaders can at times be hated for decisions or changes that we make. It can be hurtful when people oppose our leadership decisions, but if we're doing so in a just manner, we live with those and understand that it's come from the right place. So quite eye-opening for me. I didn't think I'd be going into the Bible to find leadership, leadership feedback for the podcast, but because I had an overwhelmingly religious response to my survey, I had to go in that direction and see what they were talking about and how that could appropriately play out in the workplace.
You know something, Kristen, just to throw one other thing in, most of the original motivational speakers, going even to John Maxwell, it's biblically based leadership. John Maxwell has the book on the irrefutable laws of Christ. But going back to the early days, you can go back to the very beginning, it was biblically based. And then it began to evolve into other ideas. But that is the origin.
Yeah, makes sense then.
Yeah.
All right. So, Ron, I am curious. Okay, so I know that what we do when we are speaking and teaching and doing our corporate executive coaching, we are talking about things that inspire us and different leadership qualities. I would love really for you to dive into that and share with others. What is your primary focus to teach when you have these opportunities?
Yeah, I think it's so cool. Number one is I love, and I mentioned this before, to have two blank dry erase boards and have the audience name a word of a poor leader and a word of a positive leader. Now, some of the words that I'm going to share are actually deep in research. They're evidence-based, and they came from other leaders. And, of course, they correspond with what staff want in leadership. Mm-hmm. But it's very interesting to me that I can put those two dry erase boards, and you could literally teach from it because people know what they want.
Yes.
They know what they want in a
Amen.
leader. So, you always have integrity. And there's going to be a chapter in my second book called The Truth About Truth. And integrity is not as easy. We love to say it. It sounds great, but it's very difficult to attain, especially when you only have a certain view of a situation or you're not permitted to, convey the entire story. So it's complicated, but we do talk about integrity, vision. They inspire people. They're adaptable. And I think leadership was tested under this COVID pandemic more than I'd ever seen. And I started calling some executives, and it turned into a therapy session because they'd been through so much, they were hurting. But I also saw greatness. I saw all these leaders come up with new plans, and they came up with these hybrid work environments. And it was just so cool to watch those leaders. They were adaptable, and they kept the agency going. Decisive, team builder, invests in personal growth. And I think that corresponds a lot with what you said about the servant leaders. They invest in people. They want to know about people. They listen. They motivate. They utilize strengths. One of the things that I've mentioned so many times, you got to understand staff personalities and understand how to motivate each individual on the team if at all possible. They protect staff's workload. You never hear that much, but they see when a staff member is getting burned out and they protect them. They will step in. I've seen leaders take on very ancillary projects or, frontline projects just to give someone a break. And I think that's really cool as long as that's temporary. They admit when they're wrong. I always say they, take the blame, share the credit. They're compassionate. They share praise, create a positive culture, cover blind spots. I don't care how effective you are, you're going to have blind spots, and you got to have a team that helps you see those blind spots. They do provide corrective feedback and other repercussions up to termination. And this is big for me, and I have helped many leaders do this. In the 90s, it was more command and control. Here's the policy. You do this, 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 and this. But in today's world, people need coaching, and they want coaches. And I think it's a much better philosophy.
Yes.
And if we get all those personalities working together and you got that right leader coaching, the sky is the limit for an organization or agency. But when you've got all of these little parts of the organization where people are backbiting and not getting along, and they don't think it affects the overall vision, but it really does. But man, if you can get all cylinders firing, to use an old V8 analogy,
yes.
you can do great things.
Oh, absolutely. When you were talking, and I want your honest opinion on this, I started thinking about how I have been over my 20 years of leadership. And I think about, again, I'm coming from a banking experience where I worked my way up from a teller to where I was overseeing, a new department in operations. And, but along the way, it was very important for me to lead from the front. And what that looked like for me was when I was a store manager, branch manager, I would be on the teller line at times, depending on the foot traffic that was coming in. I wasn't above that. And if that's where I was needed, that's where I would go. Or if I needed to be at the banker desk, or I would make it work. And for me, I gained a lot of respect from my team for doing so. But I will say, over the years, I did get feedback from my leaders that didn't like that I was, this is the terminology, a working manager, right? Where you're actually, you're not just managing 100% or leading 100% of the day. You're actually working, doing the work of what your team does. And that one, I struggled with that, because for me, if you don't have the proper staff and there is a clear deficit, I thought it was the best thing to do as a leader to step in the best I could to help bridge that gap. But I did get a little flack for that. And I am curious your honest thoughts on a working manager, the pros and cons.
Well, if you check my verbiage from a few minutes ago, I said temporarily.
Yes, that resonated with me for sure.
You do have to play your role, and that is oversight in many cases, that coaching. And, if a coach is playing, they can't coach the other four.
Right.
So I think to do that briefly, it shows the team you're willing to get your hands dirty, and that's important. But that cannot be the crutch that they go to all the time. So again, a lot of leadership is discretion. You use your discretion. You have to have enough intuitiveness to know when someone's just trying to use you as a crutch, or they really need help temporarily. So it's a judgment call, but I'm pretty sure you did the right thing, unless you were doing that all the time.
Yeah, no, it was definitely, believe me, if I didn't have to, I wouldn't have. But especially towards the latter of my career, I'm like, no, I'm good. I think I've earned not being in a teller window. But again, the majority of it was like, if there was a gap, I'm going to fill it. But you're right. I think what can happen is there can be blurred lines between, if you're working shoulder to shoulder with your team, 90% of the time, you're one of them. You're not leading them. It can feel that way for your team. And so I do think it is a fine line. And so thank you for the honest feedback on that, because that is something that I thought of when you said temporarily. And that's why I went there, because I was like, I might have done it a little more than temporarily. Looking back, I'm able to say that. Ron, I want to hear, who is your favorite leader and why?
Well, I'm gonna use this for a personal moment. I'm going to be honest. I did not have great mentors and leaders in my life early on. And it wasn't until later in my career that I had a supervisor by the name of Dave Stevens, and I had the distinct honor. He was in the audience in a federal law enforcement graduation. I was facilitating, of course, so I had the distinct honor to give him a shout out during that ceremony, because I was a terrible writer. He had so much patience with me and worked with me and got me up to speed. Neither of us would have ever dreamed I would be overtraining one day when I started in that small office. He was probably more shocked than me, but I was able to give him a shout out. He was a godly leader, He really was. He had 5 kids. They're all world changers. It's really amazing. He was a homeschooler, and you'll like that, Kristen.
Yeah.
And he's an amazing person. Number 2 was Pastor Ron Crum. He was a guy that I connected with in Charleston, West Virginia, and inspired me, believed in me, and to this day, I did leadership training at his church in Georgia, a very big ministry there. And number 3, and this person is very special to me, is Dr. Sam Samples. He was over the whole eastern United States Federal Bureau of Prisons. He retired, got bored, came back as chief United States probation officer, and I began to work with him. And there's a section in my book, Kristen, I do have to do a plug because it's a very interesting story. But through a series of events, I won't do a spoiler, the United States Marshal Service filed a complaint against me. And they were upset because they thought that I'd taken over their investigation. We had a meeting, and Dr. Samples traveled to the little branch office along with the U.S. Marshal, the Deputy U.S. Marshal, and the Deputy Chief U.S. Probation Officer. And he literally just walked in and he commanded the room. He said, my officer did exactly what the federal rules of criminal procedure say you're supposed to do. And this is really your pride. And I mean, and I couldn't believe it because, I was so nervous. I didn't know how this was going to turn out.
Right.
I've got the U.S. Marshals pissed. I mean, who can say that?
Yeah.
And then he just let them have it. And we ended the meeting. And I was like, oh, my God, we have a chief. That's the title that they have. And then later in life, or later in my career, he had a guitar collection. So I ended up going to his house. I play guitar. So we had a glorious evening.
A jam sesh.
We had a jam sesh. And a quick funny side note for our listeners, he pulled out 3 guitars. And I was thinking, bless his heart, he thinks that's a collection. And so anyway, I play those 3, and I think we're done. We're going to eat dinner. And he goes, well, I've got some more. He opens 2 closets on 2 different floors. They're stacked. Guitars are stacked.
Whoa.
I'm talking probably a couple $100,000 in guitars. I said to myself, I stand corrected. This guy has a collection. But anyway, back to him. He called me in his office one day, and he looked at me and he says, why don't you have a master's degree? I froze.
Wow.
And I started trying to come up with excuse. And he said, no, you can do it. You need to go ahead and get that master's degree. I mean, I promise you, it might have been a 3-minute conversation. I walked down the hallway thinking, oh my God, I've got so much going on. How am I going to get a master's degree? But I have to get a master's degree. I went back to my office, I promise you, and I registered at a university. And through a series of events, I ended up doing a hybrid type, but I got my master's degree.
Wow.
And I think had he not, he had his doctorate, and he told me that he had to get hospitalized when he was defending his dissertation. It was that demanding. So I thought, if he can do that, I think I could get a master's degree. So shout out to Dr. Sam Samples. I wrote about him in my book, and I'm speaking. I'm the keynote speaker for the West Virginia Department of Highways May 2nd, and I'm going to visit him.
That is incredible. I love that.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yes, it really is. And, it ties nicely into the 2 leaders. When I reflect back on who inspired me the most, it's the 2 Jasons. There's a New York Jason and an Oregon Jason.
Friday the 13th. Oh, I thought you were going into Friday the 13th.
Yeah, no, I never watched. It's funny.
Or Halloween. Anyway.
I can't do those slasher, thrasher, whatever. Those freak me out. But no, both named Jason. On your
personality.
Yeah. True crime, not that other stuff.
Oh, wrong podcast.
So the 2 Jasons. So, okay, when I think of first, they're incredible because they both pushed me. I can remember still New York Jason. When I moved to New York City, I worked in the Empire State Building, and I was the market growth leader, which is kind of like a banker manager hybrid type of role. But anyways, when I worked under him, I did not know the city, or I almost said from my ass, from my elbow. I don't know, whatever that term is. I did not know the inner workings of the city. I could barely find the Empire State Building when I came out of the subway on my first day. And so he sends me on this mission to go bring his business cards all over town to develop all these relationships, which was great. I understood what he was doing. I couldn't find these locations. He sent an Oregonian into New York City to go find all of these. And when I say you think of a New York City office building as this massive office building. No, there are tiny little offices all over the city, and you can't even see them until you actually are in it, right? They're just tiny and hard to find. I spent an entire day familiarizing myself with the city because Jason, I even went back like 3 times, like, I can't find these offices. And he'd give me a little more instruction and push me right back out there. And so that was how he led. He led that way. And it wasn't mean at all. His disposition was always friendly yet firm. And I grew so much under him. And so that's New York, Jason. And then fast forward. So then I transfer, come home, and I'm in Oregon again. And I have a new manager, Jason, in Oregon. And he really, when I really think of someone who's an incredible leader, and I would say 99.9% of people that have worked under him would agree, what he did is I felt like immediately he took the time, uninterrupted, sat there and had a conversation with me. And he wanted to know what made me tick. Asked me about my personal life for the first time in a long time where a leader did that. Talked to me about I had just become a mom. I thought that was a weakness up until I had him as a leader. He was so excited for that journey for me. And he mentioned how once you have kids, you really grow. And it was so cool. So I felt really comfortable with him that he actually took the time to really give a damn about who I was, what made me tick in my personal life and in the office. But here's what he started doing to me. So he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself yet. And he saw this public speaker in me. So he signed me up for Toastmasters. And so, and I was so pissed. I'm like, are you serious? Like, that was not, I kind of used to have like the too cool for school, like, but deep down it was just insecurity, right? I was like, oh no, that's not my jam. But it was because I was terrified. And so he signed me up for Toastmasters. I did that and learned so much. It was an incredible experience. I eventually had my entire team signed up and we were all doing that after hours together. That was so cool. The other thing that Jason, he empowered me and pushed me out of my comfort zone regularly, but it was in such a way that you knew his intentions were pure. It wasn't a power tripper. It wasn't that dictator mentality. You're going to do it because I can tell you to do it because I'm your leader, right? It was because he saw something in me. I flourished so much under him. And it was I only worked under him for 1 year. And my leadership strengths grew exponentially. So I still, to this day, I just think I've had many great leaders, but he just really did a lot for me. So thank you, Jason M., if you're listening.
That's awesome.
Pretty cool.
Good job, Jason. Both Jasons, but...
Yeah, both Jasons. But yeah, the one here in Oregon, definitely like your quintessential, everyone loves them type of guy.
Yeah.
So, Ron, I think you're going to break down 3 ways that leaders can impact us.
Yeah. Because we talk so much about leadership behavior, I want to look categorically at leadership. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we don't think about this, and we forget with some of the things that make our lives easier day to day. But first, you have visionaries, and these people you may never meet, but they see beyond the norm. They're extraordinary. They see things that, especially if you go into the Industrial Revolution, all the way up to the tech craze, you had visionaries. And I always brush up on this. I think it's so important that we know history. Like, you've got people like Henry Ford. Now, Henry Ford, and I'm going to explain in a minute why you got to take, the wheat with the tare, as the Bible says, the good with the bad. But Henry Ford came up with this amazing idea of the Model T. He made this durable, he had to go through a lot of models, and he did not invent the automobile. He had seen, but he did invent the assembly line. And he was firing off vehicles faster than anyone. And of course, the Dodge brothers were former employees and associates and all that, and they became a competitor. But what happened with Henry Ford is he believed so strongly in the Model T, the black Model T, that he wasn't open to another color. He wasn't open to another design. So that's a story in and of itself, how the Dodge brothers pushed him outside of his comfort zone. And his son kind of had to take the company to another level. But a story that I love is Willis Carrier. And you may think you haven't heard that name, but you have if you're listening. If you've heard of Carrier refrigerators or Carrier air conditioning, but he saw a refrigerator and he said, I think I can cool a whole building. And of course, that seemed completely impossible. And we forget, imagine you're sitting in a hot building and you're an engineer and you look around and you say, I can cool this. Like, who does that?
Right.
So anyway, I read this one little quote. It had, he was like on a train. It's 1902 on a cold, foggy train platform in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. As he stared through the dense mist, Carrier recalled thinking, if I can saturate air and control its temperature at saturation, I can get air with any amount of moisture I want in it. I can do it, too, by drawing the air through a fine spray of water to create actual fog. This guy was sitting there thinking about that stuff in 1902. So I just think that's super cool. So you have visionaries, all these major inventions that we take for granted, from the automobile all the way up to this podcast right now. We forget that it took ingenuity. And these people, especially in the early 1900s, those guys, man, it was amazing what they did. So then the second category besides visionary is inspirational leaders. Now, these are the type, they don't just make your life better. They inspire you to be better, to do better. They challenge you to take on great things. You know, you can go back. We hear a lot about it, but Martin Luther King Jr., that I Have a Dream speech puts chills on me to this day.
Right.
Like he stepped up and delivered that in Washington, D.C. Winston Churchill, the city has been bombed by Nazi Germany, and he goes on the radio and says, on the seas and in the buildings and on the land, we will fight, and we will win. And the people believed it. They would gather around that radio every night and get that inspiration from him. And then you move to Vince Lombardi. He has got probably the most quotes of maybe any influencer in the world, but he was a coach for...
Got a lot of amazing quotes out there. They get better and better.
And he never had a losing season. He put Green Bay Packers on the map. And I love this one. It was ahead of its time. But he said, the winner is always part of the answer. The loser is always part of the problem. The winner always has a program. The loser always has an excuse. The winner says, let me do it for you. The loser says, that's not my job. The winner sees an answer for every problem. The loser sees a problem for every answer. The winner sees a green near every sand trap. The loser sees 2 or 3 sand traps near every green. The winner says it may be difficult, but it's possible. The loser says it might be possible, but it's too difficult. Be a winner.
Oh, love
God,
that.
I love that guy. What about you, Kristen?
Amazing. I've definitely used some of his quotes before.
Any inspirational leaders for you?
Yeah, I've got a few. Mine are coming out of England. I'm a bit of a history buff myself. And you touched on Winston Churchill earlier. And I know I'm going to start reading a book that is about his wife, because I feel like a lot of times every great leader, they don't have to be married and have an actual spouse that is helping them along the way. But they have to have somebody, almost like their own mentor, right? And I know for Winston Churchill, if it wasn't for his wife, I don't think he would have been the leader that he was. And so, something about him, he was a flawed man who became a great leader. He made big mistakes early on in his political career, mainly along the lines of strategy. He had some failures along the lines of war strategies, but he overcame them by being bold, brave, and tireless. And really, he saved England from being taken over by Nazi Germany. And boy, I've been researching this quite a bit lately. Boy, did they come close. But if it wasn't for Winston Churchill and his goals and his visions to ensure that didn't happen, it would be a completely different world for them at that time. Also, fast forward into the 80s in England, we have Margaret Thatcher. Now, she was known as the Iron Lady. And I mentioned earlier, people that rule with an iron fist. That's very different from the Iron Lady, Margaret Thatcher, because she had a humble upbringing. She led very differently. She led from the front, for sure. My favorite quote of hers is, being a leader is like being a lady. If you have to remind people you are, you aren't. Boom, right? I mean, is
Boom.
that not amazing?
Yeah.
So she understood that leadership is not about titles, photo ops, posturing, that true leadership is about authenticity and standing up to principles even in the face of strong opposition. Wow, that is big, and we need a lot more of that present day.
For our listeners, Kristen, they can pull up on YouTube and look at the relationship between Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. It is very inspiring and very unique. They played off of each other's strengths, and they formed an alliance that is talked about to this day.
Right.
It's very powerful.
Yes.
Well,
my kids actually, real quick, my kids actually just learned about that, and really. It's pretty cool because we learn the entire timeline. They're homeschooled also, but we do a homeschool group, and they are loving the history timeline. And so, yeah, we just focused on Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, and how they were working together to really keep government small, to keep it small the way it should be. And so, gosh, that was such a beautiful relationship. I'm glad you mentioned that.
It was. Okay, so we've talked about a couple categories of leaders, those visionaries and those that inspire you, but then you have mentors. These are more in our personal lives. These are those people, that teacher, that coach. And I thought it was sad, Kristen, we put on our Facebook group lists, your mentors and things like that. And I don't remember, 5 or 6 different people tell me they did not really have anyone. And I just want to say that to those of you listening, be a mentor to someone, mentor someone. They need it. And I have to say in my younger life, I didn't really have a really good mentor either. But I want to tell a quick story. I think our listeners will enjoy this. But if you listen to Greek mythology at all, most people know the name Zeus, but they don't realize the word mentor comes right out of Greek mythology. And so King Odysseus, his son was Telemachus, and his wife was Penelope. So Odysseus has to go off and fight the Trojan War. And he leaves his son and Penelope under the care of a guy named, wait for it, Mentor. His name is Mentor. So what happens is when Odysseus leaves, Telemachus is not ready. He needs a mentor, but he doesn't know what he's doing. So all of a sudden, these young men in the kingdom, they start to decide, hey, one of them needs to sleep with Penelope so they can redo the bloodline, dethrone Telemachus if somebody can get Penelope pregnant and so forth. So when Telemachus needed Mentor the most, Mentor was not there. So ironically, we use the word mentor. He was terrible. He was pathetic. So Athena, if you study Greek mythology, the gods like to mingle among the men. So Athena actually takes on the form of Mentor, and she bails Telemachus out of this situation. So I think that's a very interesting story because we all know the word, but we don't know where it comes from. But the point I want to make here is no matter who the person is, they are always going to have weaknesses. And I think our problem is we don't grasp the moment, the beauty of someone mentoring us. Now, it can be short term. Maybe they're showing us like something to do at the bank. Maybe it's a short term thing, but there may also be long term mentors. And if you're around human beings, we're flawed. I made mistakes as a leader. I still make mistakes. But if people can be mature enough and understand the beauty of the gifts, and, you put things you want to mimic and things you don't, but you can learn a great deal from mentors. Now, I believe a lot of times it happens organically. Like you'll just feel inspired to be around this person. They'll feel it and they'll invest in you like Jason did you for that 1 year. But, he poured that investment in you. And sometimes it keeps going. The 3 mentors I mentioned to you, even though I met them later in life, they're still in my life, which is, really awesome. If that happens. But I thought our listeners or viewers would enjoy that story. And please understand that, man, we need mentors. We really need mentors in today's world. So consider being one.
Yeah, we really do. And it's interesting, Ron. So I wanted to ask you, for someone, You mentioned organic, and that is great. I do agree, because I remember asking somebody to be my mentor because it was suggested to me that I should ask this person, and it felt really artificial, and we didn't have that rapport. Personalities didn't really match up, and so it just didn't work out. Do you feel like, have you ever had that awkward moment where you're like, would you be willing to mentor me? Like, do you just go there, or does it just kind of blossom on its own?
I'm going to be honest, Kristen. I was approached quite a bit when I was academy director from U.S. probation officers, and I had people reach out like just out of the blue and say that, will you mentor me? And it felt odd. I didn't know them. And I wasn't sure I had the time. So I base it a lot. This is what I tell people who are seeking a mentor: build some kind of a relationship first and let it develop organically. Because it put a little bit of pressure on me as well to say, will you mentor me? Because I don't know this person. I don't know anything about them. But I will tell you this. There was a woman who was a state probation officer. She found me on Instagram, made me laugh right off the bat, and said, I love your stuff. And she didn't say, will you mentor me? She said, I was hoping I might get a few tips here and there from you on getting so high up in my career. And man, she just hooked me right in.
Yes.
And, I still occasionally, have a message. She just had a child, which is really cool. She and her husband. But she got me wanting to mentor her, the way she approached it. So I agree with you. It's difficult. I'm not saying not to do that, but if you have the opportunity, maybe that's not the initial conversation with someone.
Yeah, that's
maybe
good feedback.
Just have a question for them, get to know them a little bit, and then move.
Right, because it needs to work for you too. They might not be the right match for you.
No, it's absolutely true. All of that's true.
Yeah, it's
so. Kristen, we're always solution minded.
Yes.
So, and we've thrown out solutions throughout this podcast, but maybe you could throw out a few more.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. So I do have some solutions ready to go. So this is important. You have to, like I talked about when I prepped for this podcast, I went in many directions and I was researching things that, I didn't think I'd be researching, right? And so that's the same for yourself. For self-growth, you need to be constantly reading something. And that doesn't mean it's not a race to who can read the most books the fastest, but at least have one that you're working on and you're working towards cover to cover, right? Watch different documentaries and just be watching. I always call them a smart, because sometimes I just need a stupid show. I'm sure you've been there, Ron. But be watching something that you are going to be gaining something from, right? There's a lot of documentaries and a lot of even just TED Talks that you can watch and learn from. And podcasts, wink, wink. If you haven't been listening to ours and sharing
Kristen's
it out.
winking if you're listening.
Yeah. Well, actually, I think I said it and I didn't actually do it. Okay, just did it. Get feedback from your team. If you're a leader and you're not asking for feedback regularly, you need to do that. And make sure that they feel comfortable giving you truthful, honest feedback. Really foster that environment of them feeling safe to actually give you that feedback.
That's right.
Work on your weaknesses. We all have weaknesses. I was vulnerable earlier and shared that, I was a working manager probably a little too often, right? And so that might have been a weakness of mine, and you have to identify that and then work on it. And that is okay. We should all be able to do that. An example, if you're unorganized, develop systems, right? That's something a lot of people struggle with. Stay relevant. I mean, look at Ron. He thinks he's Gen Z. Stay relevant.
Listen, I have the best MySpace.
Still on MySpace, Ron?
My MySpace is the best around. So Kristen, part of the reason I started
Tom is like your BFF.
Yeah, exactly. My first friend. Because there's younger listeners have no idea when you said Tom. But part of my goal for this whole podcast is to help Kristen be relevant. Like I started this for her. And so I'll keep you up on the latest lingo and all that stuff, Kristen.
Oh, my goodness. I really appreciate it. I mean, we did some of that new lingo with the BDE thing. Now I'm feeling a little bad about the placement of bringing that up right after godliness. Gosh, I'm going to kick myself when I wake up at midnight tonight. I'm going to be like, why did you do that? I do that, Ron. I don't know about you. I wake up in the middle of the night and I think about at what point in the conversation something was brought up. I'm like, dang it, I should have done something different. But that's how we learn and grow. And this is just off the fly here. This is not necessarily on my solutions list, but I just want to say it's important that we can identify things like that, and then just be constantly working on ourselves. We all do it at any level, so I just think it's important to understand that. Ron and I, we're doing that constantly. You should hear us game planning before, after the show, throughout the week. We're just always working on ourselves, and I highly encourage that. Be authentic. Oh, this is like such perfect timing. Be authentic. If you mess up, admit it. Seriously. I mean, there couldn't be better advice there. Nothing is phonier than watching somebody fudge an answer. I remember that. I'd always tell my employees, please do not make up an answer. If you don't know an answer and a client asks you, just say, I'm not quite sure, but I'm going to find that for you. They will appreciate you. They don't want you to lie to them so that you can save face and feel better. I don't know. It just, if you mess up, admit it and solve it by fixing it, right? And then never stop learning. Oh my goodness. I mean, there's even like health reasons that's important. Alzheimer's prevention, all of that. Just be a learner. You can have some dumb shows. Once in a while, I like to watch something that's not a thinker, but there is so much out there. You hear us talking about history today. My gosh, it helps us navigate the world we're in today, because Ron and I have a pretty good understanding of what's happened over the last 150 years. And going back even further, like Ron's bringing up Greek mythology here today. But it's so important. Be curious.
Kristen, on Never Stop Learning, or I call it the lifelong learner, I had someone who went through someone else, read my book, asked if they could interview me, and they did. And it was really interesting. At the end of the interview, she said, what advice would you give me? I said, be a lifelong learner. She waited and waited. I didn't say another word. She went, okay, I get it. So I always say, read, watch, listen, always be a lifelong learner. And the interesting part about living in today's world is, I used to tell my daughters, if I had Google, I'd be dangerous if I was your age and I had Google.
Yes.
But it's out there. The information's out there, whether it's YouTube, TED Talks, like you said. If you want to hunt for it, it's out there. Now, one of the reasons, we do a podcast, and it's a leadership podcast, but also entertaining, I hope, is we want to make that easy for you. I don't want you to have to go look up everything. That's why we research and come on here. But maybe we can spark something that you want to do a deep dive in, and really get into it. That's really cool. I tell everyone, you should know history. You should absolutely know history.
Yes.
And it will affect every part of your life if you have a good understanding of the mistakes, the glory, and all the things that happened in the past. It'll make you a better person, make you a better leader for sure.
It will. Whew. It will. And you know what? You get cool points too. When you're in a group setting, a way to separate yourself from the pack is to know things that others may not know, likely don't know. So I think just for that alone, if you want to make yourself stand out amongst leaders, have these bits of information, this historical information in your back pocket, and plug it in when you need it.
I got to tell you, that's a grand slam at the end, because you're right. And I used to entertain federal judges and entertain the criminal law committee, which is the chief federal judge, 12 chief federal judges on the criminal law committee. And I'm sitting there at the table, and I start discussing the Nuremberg trials with one of the chief federal judges. And I could even see my leaders like, wow, I didn't know Ron knew that,
Yes.
So you never know when that piece of information, and I did it because I enjoyed it. I wasn't trying to put on a show, but it was really good feeling to know that I could sit there and talk about these trials in Nazi Germany with a chief federal judge. And
yes.
I kind of brought a little bit to the table.
Yes,
so you're right.
Absolutely.
That can separate you from the pack. Be the thought leader. Be the historian.
Yes.
It'll pay off.
I love it.
All right,
Absolutely.
Kristen, I've got a question for you.
Where can people find us?
You catch on so quickly. I'm telling you.
I know. Episode 7. I've got it down now. All right. If you haven't already, follow us. You can follow us anywhere you get your podcasts, primarily Apple and Spotify. We're also on YouTube if you want to watch and listen, and Rumble. If you want to interact with us on social media, we referenced the Facebook group earlier today. We are active on Facebook and have a Face Group book. And also we are on Instagram. So you can find us pretty much anywhere on the main social media tech giants. And we want to interact. As I talk to you guys about different feedback I get from my Instagram followers, Ron prompts people, and so do I on the Facebook group. It's important that we have this interaction and submissions from our listeners to really keep going and keep learning together.
Hey, Kristen, I want to add that we are going to have some surprises. If you've survived this long in the podcast, we've got some surprises coming. We're going to move into some giveaways, and we're going to be making a joint announcement about the company, forward operations, and some things that Chris and I are working on a joint project. Yes. So we got some really cool stuff coming up in the months to come, and we will certainly let you know about that. But I think our Facebook group should, since they've been the most active, should get the first giveaway. Someone in that group, maybe Kristen,
think so.
We'll talk about that. All right, everyone.
Yes, for sure.
Be the leader you're meant to be.
We'll see you next week.
The Dirty Side of Leadership podcast is brought to you by Forward Operations. If you'd like to book Ron or Kristen for speaking events, training, or executive coaching, visit forwardoperations.com. Be the leader you're meant to be.